Hi there. Welcome to the first in a two-part series that's going to use the Social Security baby names data set. This data set is pretty famous. It's literally all of the baby names from 1900. The one that we're using is to 1999, although I believe you can download versions of it to 2015 at this point. But the version that we're going to use has been cleaned in order to save you a few steps along the way. The first half of this tutorial is going to be about doing calculations. As you'll see, when we pull the data in, it's pretty sparse. And we're going to need to manipulate it in order to make the visualizations that we want to. But we're starting with a few different questions. So we know we have this names database, well, let's go and take a look at it, and then we'll ask our questions. It comes in as a text file, and you should have a link to this in the from the course website. And it should be Social Security name data.csv. We'll pull that in. And it's pretty simple here. We have name, sex, year, and the number of occurrences. And that's it. So we are going to, well, if we look at this, we have a few questions. The first obvious question is, what is the popularity of a name over time? Now, there's a lot of names in here, so we're going to have to figure out how to filter that out for the end user, but that's not our problem right now. Our problem is, how popular is a given name over time? Another thing we might be interested in is the number of outliers. Are there male or female names that have changed or that are assigned to different genders more than others? Has there been any trend in that overall? And what's the most common first letter? So I'm always interested in the first letter and the last letter because I think it says a lot about how we name people and things. So, what's the distribution of the first letter in US baby names? Are M's really all that much more popular? And is there anything else that's interesting that naturally comes out of this as we start asking these questions? In the next video, we're going to answer these with a tree map, a line chart, a scatter plot, a word cloud, all kinds of cool things. In this tutorial, we'll do some just basic exploratory type of visualizations. We're actually going to make a distribution plot, also called a rug plot. Excellent. All right, but the first thing we need to do is calculate our fields. Now, we have two data types in this data set. Our first data type are strings. So name is a string variable. We would never perform an operation on a name. Adding two names together doesn't do anything for us, right? We have another variable, which is a binary category. It means that there's only two values here. It's binary, and it's categorical. You either fall into the male bin or the female bin. Now, there are inherent problems with that we as a society are becoming more aware of every year. For the purposes of this data set and very many data sets, gender is going to be treated as a binary characteristic, or sex, rather, is treated as a binary characteristic. This does not mean that, that is how people are, but that is the bins that we have put people into. So we work with it. All right. The next one we have is year. Now, years are interesting because they actually are a quantitative variable. They are numeric. They're not a string. So because you can add a number to a year, it's a numeric variable. So I can say 1,994 plus 2, and that makes sense. We get 1996. Now it's interesting because we don't often think about the fact that 1994 is actually counting from an arbitrarily defined 0, or depending on your worldview and your religion, not arbitrarily defined, but it's counting from a 0 point, right? And that means that we can add things to it and move further away from the zero. So as opposed to something like zip code, which is also numbers, but is actually a string variable, we can't perform calculations on it. Year, we can perform calculations on it. Right? And the last one we have is occurrences, which is obviously numeric. Okay, let's get started with transforming some of these variables. Now, you've already done some calculations, but we're going to do much more complex ones. So the first thing that we want to know is how many of each name are female. So many names, if you think about like Kelly, many names are given to both males and females, and those have changed over time. So in order to figure out how many are female, we are going to first click on the occurrences. We'll select Create Calculated Field, and I'm going to call it Calc : This calc reminds me that I have made the calculation. This did not come in the data set. It's really important to encode this for yourself somehow, because if your data is looking all kinds of crazy and you're like, wait, where are those numbers coming from? It helps you pinpoint and debug and figure out, that might be human error. You made a mistake somewhere in a calculation. All right, so in our calc, we're going to say calc female. And our calculation is going to be, I'm going to give myself a few rows here. If the sex variable equals female, then count the occurrences. When it starts doing that autocomplete down there, you can just hit the tab button. And then end. Okay. So what we've written here is we've told Tableau, okay, if the sex variable is female, then count the occurrences. If it's not, just pass. So here, Adel, in our newly formed column, we should see a 0, right? Or we should see a null value. We actually won't even see a 0, it'll be null, because the condition was not met. Sex was not female, so Tableau will just pass it and look for the next one that's female. Looks like I have a typo here. Okay. All right, so we're going to click Apply and then OK. Fantastic! It did exactly what we were expecting. Adel came out null for all 3 values, and Alia and Aisha came out with numbers for all 3 values, because these ones are male and these ones are female. Excellent! All right, now take a second, pause the video, and do the exact same for male. Great! You should have 1 column here now for male and 1 column here now for female. If you didn't calculate the male column, go ahead and do that now before moving on. All right. Now we're going to calculate some static numbers. We're going to use a little trick because we really want to know the number of occurrences for a given name irrespective of the year, right? So it'd be really nice, or I anticipate that I'm going to want to know how many times Adel was a name, not across 1994, 95, 99, but I want to know just in total how often since 1900 has Adel been used as a name, right? In order to calculate that, I'm going to use another little trick. So I'm going to click here on occurrences, and I'm going to create calculated field. I'm going to call it calc, and this time I'm going to put the word fixed. Fixed means that it is a fixed number. It is not a variable. So I'm going to go fixed sum occurrences. Okay. And what that means is that it's not that there's going to be a new column here with a number for Adel, because that actually wouldn't make sense, because we don't have any number that corresponds to Adel in 1994. We will just have kind of a floating, disconnected number that corresponds to Adel in general. But it doesn't belong to Adel's record. It's metadata or a global piece of information about this data set. But it's not an actual data point because you can't make a record for it. You can't say Adel, male, 1994, and then have it be the total for all the times that Adel existed. Okay. So I just want to be really clear. Tableau actually does a pretty good job of encoding that in this calculation. All right, so we're going to go to the beginning of the line, and we're going to type a left curly brace. And we're going to say fixed, and then what we're fixing is the name, right? I'm going to put a colon, and I'm going to say this fixed means don't take into account anything else, but rather group by the name. So fixed name, and then I'll go sum of occurrences. Right? And then I'm going to apply and click OK. And you'll notice that all of this becomes undefined, and we get this little I here. And what Tableau tells us is that because it contains an aggregate calculation, the data isn't meaningful until we're at a much broader level. So at the individual record level, this data is not meaningful. We knew that, and that's okay. All right, we're going to keep moving on. The next thing that we want to figure out is the percent of females and the percent of males. We'll do females together. All right, so go ahead and click on the Calc Female column. You actually can click on any column at all. I just like to click on the one that I'm going to be working with. So I'm going to call this new variable calc female percent. And this is another variable that's not necessarily directly associated with each record. So it's going to be another fixed variable, because what I'm calculating is that for each name, what percent of the total is female. Okay, so I'm going to call it fixed, and then I'm fixing it on the name. And then we want the sum of the calc female divided by the sum of the occurrences. And then close my curly braces. All right, let's look at this for a second. So we have fixed our name in place. So I've said for each name in this database, take the calc of female, so however many females, and divide it by the occurrences, okay? The sum of the occurrences. So what this is going to do is it's going to find, let's say, the name Kelly, and it's going to say, okay, 200 people in this database are named Kelly and are female. And I'm going to divide that by all of the people named Kelly. Maybe there's 500 people named Kelly. And this is going to return 40%. So since 1900, Kelly has been 40% female. Okay. So for every single name, we're going to take the sum of the times it was assigned to a female and divide it by the times it was assigned to anybody. Okay, so I'm going to apply. I'm going to click OK. Now, it would be trivially easy for you to calculate the percent male from this. However, since we would like to have that information easily and we don't want to have to calculate it again, go ahead and calculate that exact variable for male. I just realized I have a typo. We want to say calc fixed female percent. That is reflected in the notes. So calc fixed female percent, because this is a fixed variable. Okay, so go ahead, take a minute and calculate the exact same thing for males. Excellent. So now you should also have a calc fixed male percent as well. All right, so we are going to keep moving forward. We just have a couple of more manipulations to do. Now we're going to move on to strings. So we wanted to ask some questions about the first letter of each name. So we're going to need to make a new variable with the first letter. All right, so I'm going to go here to name, and I'm going to create calculated field. I'm going to call it calc first letter, and I'm going to say left because I want to take the leftmost letter. I'm going to pass it the name, and then I'm going to say the first one. So take the left first letter. If I wanted the last letter, I would say left name -1, or you might have guessed, right name 1. Because what we're saying is start from the left, read the name, and then take the first item. We can just as easily say start from the right, read the name, take the first item, and that would give us the last letter. Okay, so feel free to do either one if you're more interested in the last letter. But we have our first letter here, and this is actually a string manipulation. I should point out that all of these operators are in here. So if you ever want to see what kind of operations you can do on a string data type, you can come over here to this drop down. You have your strings. There is actually an ends with that makes it a little bit easier. There's dates, so you can find the earliest date, the latest date, the difference between dates. Date addition and date subtraction is a little bit different. And each of these give you the details of exactly how to work with all of these different data types. So this is the logical operators that we were working with, the if, which is, here's our if-then expression. And it breaks down exactly how to fill in each item to use these. So if it's a date, that type of thing. Excellent. You can do table calculations. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this class, but if you get really interested in it, you can do pretty advanced stuff in here, actually. Okay. The calculations that people do on their fields is actually available when you download somebody's Tableau workbook. So if you're like, how on earth did they get that number? You can actually recover it. How they did the manipulation. You can't see the data, but you can recover how they did the manipulation. All right, so that is enough about the objects here. Know that there's tons and tons of assistance over here. If you're ever like, I don't know what to do, you can also always Google it, and then it'll point you to some of these functions. Okay, so we're going to apply that. Click OK. And we have our column of first letters. Fantastic! We are almost there. All right. The next thing we're going to do is going to be a Boolean search. So we want to find some interesting data points. And we are going to set up our criteria. And then through our Boolean calculation, Boolean means true or false, we will find out if that record fits our criteria. Okay, so the criteria we want to use are names that are used less than 75% of the time by females, but more than 25% of the time by females. So we want to know those names that kind of fit into this really narrow band of data. So it actually doesn't matter at all which variable you choose on, but I'm going to go and look for my calc % female. because that is what it's based on. Now, I would like to point out this is getting really, really, really abstract. And I fully recognize that. At this point, we're looking at a bunch of undefined characteristics. After we complete these, I'll show you another way to create calculated fields. If, as you're going, you're like, wait, I need to figure out the numbers some other way. I'll show you where else to get this. Okay, so I've found my fixed female percent. I'm going to click on Create Calculated Field. And I'm going to call this Calc Female Outliers. Okay. And it'll be anywhere that calc fixed female percent is greater than 0.25 and calc fixed female percent is less than 0.75. Okay, so I want this condition, it's greater than 0.25, so like a third of females have this name, and it's not that every female has this name, so less than 3/4 have it. Okay, so we'll click on Apply, click on OK, and we should have another undefined field over here, but you'll notice that the data type has changed to a true/false. This indicates to us that it's a Boolean variable. All right, so go ahead and take a couple of minutes and do the exact same for female. Or the exact same for male. We want to find the male outliers, the males that fit the exact same criteria. All right, congratulations. You have completed all of the calculations. We are going to move on now and do a short exploratory data analysis. I'm going to click on my sheet 1 here, and just to make sure, you should have 3 calculated dimensions and 4 regular dimensions. You should have 5 calculated measures and 3 regular measures. Okay? All right, if you have that, congratulations, you've done a great job. If not, go ahead and go back to the handout and figure out where you've gone wrong. We're going to move on now and do a quick exploratory analysis of this data. All right, so we want to make a rug plot or a dispersion plot. They're the same thing. About the male and female outliers. And I want to break this up by name. So I want a list of names, and then I want the years across the bottom, and I want to know when, all right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is drag my year to the columns. I'm also going to drag my female outliers to the columns and my male outliers to the columns. Right? Now, I don't actually want all of the male and female outliers. I only want those that are true. So I'm going to click here and click Filter. And I don't want anybody that's null or false. I only want the values that are true. Okay. Click OK there. And I'll do the exact same for the male outliers. I'll filter, and it's filtered only by those that are true. Okay. So I'll click OK. And then we will drag the name to the rows. And we get this very helpful warning. It's saying that it may contain as many as 32,000 members. The recommended max shelf is 1,000. Okay, so we normally would say filter and then add, but we know that we've already filtered because there's the female outliers we filtered on and the male outliers. So there's actually not going to be 32,000, or we at least don't expect that there won't be. So we're going to say add all members. Right? This is not 32,000. This is, maybe a couple hundred, right? Excellent. So now we have a list of all of the names that have been, used for both males and females. Congratulations. But this is a little bit hard to read. It would be really helpful if I knew which ones were male and which ones were female. Well, I have a variable for that. I'm going to pull sex over here to my color. And it gives me these ones are male and these ones are female, right? I don't really like those colors. I, would like to change them. I'm going to click on the color marks card. I'm going to click edit colors. I'm going to select a new palette. Maybe I'll choose summertime or I'll choose jewel bright. Click assign palette, otherwise it won't assign those colors. And, Tableau is very helpful. It assigned these in order. That's not very helpful for me. So I'm going to click on male here, and I'm going to make males green, and I'm going to make females maybe purple. Okay. Click apply, and then OK. It's very, very pastel. You can go ahead and play around with that and fix it, but you get the picture of what you can do. All right, really quick, I'm going to remove this true here. I'm going to right click, and it says show header. I don't want you to show me that header. I'm going to right click, say show header. I don't want you to show me that header. I'm going to put the title up here, and I'm going to call it male and female outlier, names at a transition. Since male and female can be recovered over here in the sex, I'm just going to call this names in transition. Okay. And I'll click apply and OK. And year here is obvious, so I'm going to right click and I'm going to say don't show the header, but now I have lost my years completely, so that's actually not what I wanted to do. I probably just wanted to format. If you right click here, you can also edit your axis. Maybe you want these to be turned. Maybe you want to change your start date. I don't want there to be year added there, so I'm just removing it. Gives a little bit more room for the numbers. So by right clicking on basically any row or column, you can edit the font, you can remove any of the titles or things like that. But this is just exploratory. This is just to give us an idea of the names that have been in transition in different years. You know how to edit your tooltips, so I encourage you to do so here. Just go and click on tooltip and edit there. And play around with this. See what names you're most interested in. Make a note of a name or two that you think that you'd like to look into more. And we'll play around with that on the next tutorial. All right, until then, enjoy.